From the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, good to have you back. Haven't seen you for a while.
No, I've been in hiding.
Not from me, I'm hoping.
No, not at all.
I suspect you've been very busy because there's been a lot going on in the world of politics, and we thought we'd grab you on today to talk international politics, specifically around the UK, and specifically around the last. Well, what are we at now? 48 days, because I know that Liz Truss resigned after 44 days, and that was last week. Less than 50 days at least. And in the last 50 days, if I can bring this up, what we've seen in the UK is Boris Johnson resigning after he lost more than 50 members of his government. They resigned in protest against a series of ethics scandals. And then, of course, it got a new PM in Liz Truss. And after 44 or 45, depending on who you speak to, days, and a disastrous idea around what appears to be tax cuts for the rich. I'm paraphrasing. I'm sure there's more detail to that, but that's what most media seems to be truncating them down to. She lost a whole bunch of trust and nearly crashed the economy, and then she was gone. And in the last, I guess, I was going to say 48 hours, the last short amount of time, we've had our third prime minister for the UK, I guess, within 50 days. Rishi Sunak. India is now in glee over the new British prime minister. The elevation of the 42-year-old Indian origin Tory leader. His parents migrated from East Africa to the UK as the third British prime minister this year. Appears to have gladdened the hearts of many Indians. Even the skeptics cannot help feel but a tad triumphant. I wonder if that's a little bit like when Obama was even the people who weren't fans of the Democrats are going like, well, we had a black president finally. I wonder if when they say the skeptics are a tad triumphant, they're thinking, it's time to break some of these glass ceilings, as they say. However, very truncated version of the last 50 days or so. Robert, what are your thoughts around what's happening with the Prime Minister and the Prime Ministership in the UK at the moment?
Well, personally, I was a bit surprised when Rishi Sunak was overlooked for Liz Truss.
Right.
In the first place, but that was because the very powerful pro-Brexit European Research Group, which is a group of about 150 MPs within the Conservative Party, which are Brexiteer devotees, they pushed very hard for Liz Truss. Why? Because Liz Truss was prepared to deliver the sort of budget they wanted, which you just alluded to, the mini budget. And during the summer, there was sort of 6 weeks. I mean, Johnson signalled in advance he was going. And then there was a sort of 6 weeks period over the British summer where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss competed in a series of debates. And Sunak, to his credit, said quite simply to Liz Truss, your economic plans will not work. What were her plans and what did she try to operationalize during the mini budget? Some radical tax cuts, which were unfunded, and effectively what Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer were proposing was that Britain should borrow £45 billion and implement these tax cuts. But that process of borrowing is very difficult for a country like Britain. Why? Because Britain already has one of the highest debt per GDP ratios in the world, more than 100%.
Yeah.
I think New Zealand's is around about 20%. So it's one thing to be already overstretched. And of course, Sunak pointed out in the sparring for the top job in the Conservative Party to Truss that her proposals were dead on arrival, basically. And that's how they proved. So it's not that surprising that Sunak, the party have now turned to Sunak. It did involve a deal, though. And that deal was that Suella Braverman, who was the Home Secretary, who broke and dishonoured the Ministerial Code of Conduct, a very keen Brexiteer with close links to the European Research Group, in fact, she's leader of it, she was prepared to transfer her and her colleagues' support within that wing of the Conservative Party to Sunak. And I think the unspoken tacit deal was she would be recalled. So one of the first things Sunak did was recall Braverman as the Home Secretary, despite her leaving in apparent disgrace 60 days ago. So you're beginning to see a few debts being paid off. But I think other than that, Sunak is very capable, probably the most capable person in Johnson's government. But we should have no illusions about him, Pat. This is not a liberal. This is someone with a very right of centre view of the world. The good news, however, is that while I understand in the first weeks or so he's going to do all the right things to keep the Conservative Party united, he has, in my view, got the intellect to work out if something is not working and whether he needs to address it. What am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about the elephant in the room, Brexit. That is the biggest single cause of Britain's economic problems at the moment. He couldn't mention it in his speech, in which he accepted the prime ministership of the country. He blamed COVID-19 and he blamed Putin's invasion of Ukraine as causing Britain's, as he put it, profound economic crisis. But that's strictly, he overlooked the major cause, which was Brexit. But he does have the capacity, I think, to learn on the job. And it'll be very interesting whether he's prepared to stick with Brexit while Brexit devastates the economy for which he, as Prime Minister, has responsibility. So that's the big tests he face in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I played a clip last week. I'm going to play it again. It's a little bit yesterday's news, but when you were talking about the Brexiteers, it made me think about this clip. And the Brexiteers that were responsible for Liz Truss and wanting that mini budget to be put in place puts a different perspective on what. Did you see this clip with Charles Walker when he was visibly angry and annoyed, basically telling the people who put Liz Truss in, you should be ashamed of yourselves? I'll play a little bit of it now.
Sure.
Because I think this was, even though we're not talking about now Liz Truss, this echoes what you've been saying as to the people who put her in and the responsibility that some are now holding with those people who put her in, especially when you see, I've read some reports saying that the Conservatives, the Tories, are 30 points behind in the polls at the moment. When their own MPs are saying things like this, you can understand why. Have a listen for people who haven't seen this.
This whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. This is an absolute disgrace. As a Tory MP of 17 years, who's never been a minister, who's got on with it loyally most of the time, I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
So we won't play the whole clip, but that's from a Tory talking about the damage that was done, which I guess was pretty much the downfall of Liz Truss, leading to the situation we're talking about today.
Yeah, of course, he's referring to the fact that Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer went ahead, despite warnings, introducing a budget which was a debacle, was immediately rejected by what are globalized markets. And that led to a run on the pound, which cost the taxpayer £65 billion.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as if Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer had no warning. People like Sunak were saying, don't do this, it will be a disaster. They went ahead and did it anyway. Why? Because the Brexiteers believe they know best. And she was responding to that constituency that put her there.
I'm interested, Robert, in your perspective, because you know me, like American politics, love it. World politics, like it. New Zealand politics, love it, sort of thing. And what I hear echoing in UK conservative politics, I see echoing in America as well. My gut tells me, though, that the American politicians don't believe what they're saying. The Ted Cruzes of this world and stuff don't believe what they're saying, but it seems like that maybe those in the UK did. And so, as the Prime Minister said in the House last week, here in New Zealand, that is, we've had a real world experience of these tax ideas. Look what's happened in the UK. Now, it's not quite apples for apples because of the debt difference, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm interested as to your thoughts around the kind of almost conservative world at the moment. People are trying to tag, Christopher Luxon in with this at the moment and talking about tax breaks in New Zealand. News Hub just ran a very unscientific, albeit more than 50,000 people involved online poll. More than 80% of respondents said they don't want tax cuts in New Zealand. I'm really interested in what this speaks of to the conservative position in politics worldwide at the moment, and then maybe even relating it to New Zealand, if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, well, the mini budget that Liz Truss had prepared, which turned out to be a disaster, was a classic sort of trickle-down economics scenario. And a lot of people in the UK are really suffering.
Yeah.
Let's be quite clear about the economic impact of Brexit. Since the Brexit referendum of 2016, the British economy has contracted at an alarming rate. It was the 5th biggest economy in the world in 2016. In 2022, it is now 7th.
Right.
And more than 2 trillion pounds, about 2.5 trillion, have left Britain to be relocated and invested elsewhere, largely in Europe, by the way. So at the moment, the economy has been in free fall since the decision. And as I said to you in my early comments, Sunak will have to address this at some point. We'll just have to see when. With regard to your comment about do these people really believe this stuff, it's often forgotten, Pat, when Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer introduced their mini budget, it was very interesting to see the people praising it. Nigel Farage thought this was the best budget since 1986.
Yeah.
He was getting praise in Republican circles in the United States. And the ERG, people like Steve Baker, who's a very prominent Conservative MP, European Research Group, who absolutely loathe the EU, they were saying this shows the benefits of Brexit. We now have the economic freedom to introduce radical tax cuts. That's before the market said, "Oh no, you don't."
Yeah.
But so to answer your question, I think there is a learning curve going on here. But a lot of these people who believed in the Brexit project, and that includes the Republicans, the pro-Trump Republicans, because they hate the EU. Why do they hate the EU so much? Because it's a series of small states pooling their sovereignty and making themselves more powerful on the international stage. And that understandably makes some bigger players, not all, quite nervous. But your question's a really difficult one to answer. I think there will be some pragmatic Brexiteers who may be taking stock, but unfortunately, to be blunt, the headbangers are not going to be deterred by economic facts. They won't let the economic facts get in the way of their truth.
Yeah.
And, this is the parallel universe in which some politicians operate.
Yeah. And I think you see,
are extremely wealthy, Pat. And if the pound plunges, it won't be their jobs that are on the line.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you see that as well. When I look at American politics, I see this level of grift on some level where I don't think that those right-wing Republicans believe it, like the Ted Cruzes of this world. But then I see some layers below, maybe some of that kind of new blood Republicans like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world who do actually believe it and they're on board. And I think for the UK, correct me if I'm wrong, there's actually nothing they can do about Brexit now, because now that they're out of the EU, they can't just go, oh, we better change that and go back in, because it would be a whole process of the EU allowing them back in. So it's not like the new Prime Minister can just turn it around and cancel all of it, can he?
No, but but let's be quite clear. Sunak's going to come under pressure from the Brexiteers who switched their support to him recently. to break international law to accommodate Brexit. That is, undermine the Good Friday Accord, which was signed and brokered by the United States. Now, the Biden administration has repeatedly warned Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss, and will probably say the same. Sunak's already had a conversation with Joe Biden.
Yep.
Don't you dare undermine the Good Friday Accord. If you do, there's no prospect of a free trade deal with the United States. So, you know, these Sunak has got more than his share of problems, both in terms of the economy, but also diplomacy. Your question, is it set in stone? No, of course not. If politicians make mistakes, and this is probably the worst mistake Britain's made since appeasement in the 1930s, in a democracy, you expect your politicians to correct mistakes.
Yeah.
The problem for British politics at the moment is the Labour opposition are paralysed by Brexit. They voted, Keir Starmer voted for Johnson's EU exit deal. So Mr. Starmer, and he would, if he was in this program now, he'd say, Patman, you got it completely wrong. I'm 30 ahead. My strategy is working. I'm not talking about Brexit. I'm just talking about getting into power and fixing everything. In fact, his view is, I'm going to make Brexit work well.
Isn't that funny that the Labour leaders in the UK are saying, I just want to get in power to fix everything, and here in New Zealand the Conservative leader saying, I just want to get into power and fix everything. It's the same argument, it just happens to be from the opposition who are on different sides. Yeah,
but you see, I think the opposition in this country, which is the National Party, have a much harder time saying everything is not working, because you can say that, but then when you come up into debate, you have to actually say what you would do differently, and how you would do it differently, and how you'd fund it differently. So that's the push. But I just want to, come back to the point we were talking about. I don't see Brexit set in stone.
Okay.
Mr. Starmer is playing a cagey game. He's not talking about Brexit because he knows if he does at this stage, it will divide his party, because they're as polarised as the Tories are on this issue. He may be thinking to himself, once I get into Downing Street, once I get the keys to Downing Street, then I may have to deal with this issue. That may be his strategy. But you know what? A lot of people don't realise this, but British citizens, until Brexit, had the right to live, work, or retire in 28 European countries, including the UK. So what we've witnessed with Brexit is a huge theft of human rights.
Mm.
And this is causing, if you look at the recent polls, over 60% of Brits now want to rejoin the EU. So,
well, that happened the day after, isn't it? Like the day after, I remember all the headlines were, what was it, remorse and regret, after they all voted to bring in the thing.
A lot of people voted in good faith for something which they were basically shafted on.
Yeah.
It was a con job. And this Brexit was the ultimate con. I mean, Johnson went around with red buses around the country saying, if you vote for Brexit, it will free up 350 billion for the National Health Service. You know what? That 350 billion never eventuated. So anyway, let's not go on about Brexit. But I think it is the elephant in the room. And Mr. Starmer, he may well get into Downing Street without talking about Brexit, but he will have to at some point address this issue, as will perhaps Sunak if he doesn't do it before him.
Hey, two other little questions.
Sure.
One relating to New Zealand. Do you think that the UK Conservative stink is going to affect the National Party in New Zealand? Is this stink going to get on them a little bit? Will the narrative from Labour, will they be able to legitimately say, look what a conservative mindset does to a country?
Well, compared with one of the big things going for the ruling party in this country is you only have to look at the mess that's in Britain at the moment. And the government would say, well, we've avoided many of those mistakes. I've got no brief for the Labour Party that's running this country. I haven't got any brief for the opposition, the National Party. All I'm saying is that in a sense, the difficulty for Mr. Luxon is if he points to the Trump example. He said John Key recently made this declaration, and John Key is a bit of a mentor for Mr. Luxon.
Yep.
But he made the observation recently that he would tend to vote for right-wing politicians. So he probably would have voted for Trump had he been American. If he'd been in Brazil, he probably would have voted for Bolsonaro. The problem is that many conservatives in power in recent years have been quite disastrous to the economy. The Conservatives have been in power for 12 years in the UK, and their economic record is abysmal. Britain's got the slowest growing economy now of 20 European countries. So, you know, I think what I've noticed about the National Party and right of centre sort of parties like ACT is they're using all this woke language. But then you challenge them, you say, well, actually, what does woke mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Silence.
100%. It's the same argument as they were all making 10.
You can't define, and you refuse to explain, you're in trouble.
Yep. 10 years ago, it was PC. Everyone's being PC. That's just what people are saying now. Everyone's being woke. It's the same thing. Hey, look, thanks for spending some time with us. I did want to ask you one other question with your expertise in international politics, and that's on the midterms coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. We can see that the Senate at one stage, I'm looking at 538 right now, the Senate at one stage was basically a 70% chance for 70 out of 100 chance for the Democrats to win. It's dropped significantly. The Republicans are catching up significantly in the Senate, according to 538 polling. It's more like a coin flip now, and Congress has gone beyond. I think it was about 80%, 80-20. Yeah, there we go. 81 and 100 for Congress as well. So it seems that, I mean, everyone always said Congress was gone, but it seems to be more gone now. But there was a lot of talk for a long time that Senate was going to go to the Democrats. It now appears to be a coin flip. And the big issue seems that the Republicans seem to have skated a little bit past Roe versus Wade. It's still there, but it seems that the big driving issue now is all economy, which kind of brings us around about to that UK conversation a little bit. But do you want to offer anything to do with the midterms, what you see, what's coming up? Any thoughts on it?
Well, my crystal ball, Pat, is no better than anyone else's. My sense is that the Democrats may do slightly better than the projections, but not by much. One of the interesting things is that Mr. Putin is putting enormous store in the Republicans doing well. So he's supporting anyone but the Democrats and his representatives in the United States. There is a view that if the Republicans get control of, probably more likely to get control of the House of Representatives than the Senate, but if they do get control, they're going to put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to reduce support for Ukraine. This is extraordinary. The Republicans tacitly supporting Mr. Putin, who's carried out an illegal invasion of a democratic country. So, you know, but Mr. Putin does represent what a lot of the Republicans like. He's authoritarian. He's anti-gay, socially conservative, and likes populists. So, in a sense, you know, quite a few Republicans seem very comfortable with America cutting its support for Ukraine trying to resist aggression in Central Europe. It's an extraordinary situation. My view is that Biden, even if the Democrats do badly, will not be deterred, because presidents sometimes will take note of a shift, but I can't see the administration backing down in its support for the Ukraine. I think they take the view in the long run that is the sensible thing to do, and Putin's on the ropes. So basically, you know, the Russian army could collapse before Christmas in eastern Ukraine. So I don't think, even if he has a big reverse in the midterms, that could happen. I don't think it's going to blow Biden off course with respect to the present policy that they're pursuing in supporting Zelensky's government.
Very good. From the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, always amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
Pleasure.
And we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, certainly. All the best. Thank you.